And my great-grandfather was murdered by Communist Party adherents. During the Qing Dynasty, and for many eras before, people always gravitated towards Confucianism as a rallying point, as a religious tinted idea that everyone could get behind. But after Communist China came, they needed a new thing to rally around. The idea behind communism at the very beginning was to lift people out of poverty, and communist ideology provided that. And a lot of people realized that, but it was something to get behind. It was almost a Faustian bargain. If you give me wealth and riches, if you give me stability and order, then I won't protest. I won't launch a political opposition. People who buy into the system, people who buy into Communist Party ideology, they reap the rewards of that sort of loyalty. Communism is a sham because there are classes in China. You start with Xi Jinping and the princelings around him, the people who do as they're told, the people who help to perpetuate the social hierarchy and the class structure, and the officials who siphon off public funds for their own good. And then you have the middle layer of bureaucrats around the country who are kind of satellite sycophants of Beijing. They also do what they're told. And then you have everybody else, and there's a word for that, 老百姓, which is basically the common people. And the common people aren't exactly having the greatest time. My dad's side of the family has suffered so much. My dad's grandfather was murdered by the communist regime. My grandparents on my father's side are illiterate rice farmers. They don't even speak the dialect. So because they were not adherents to the Communist Party, they did not have opportunities to climb up the economic ladder. And so that was a punishment that was meted out to them. They lived in these shanty huts with dilapidated floors. It's just been really hard. Socialism demands misogyny in order to perpetuate itself. It needs to put women under control. Women need to be docile and submissive and just to, churn out the babies and to help the Chinese economic machine. During the Cultural Revolution, Mao Zedong forced the women to have as many children as possible. So these farmers in far-flung villages in China had 10 to 12 kids, and resulting in a huge population boom. In order to reverse the damage done by that policy, China had to institute the one-child policy. Misogyny in Chinese culture is still very much alive. My value is measured by traditional metrics, like whether I'm married or I have a child. When I was born, I found out that they had preferred to have a son. That was one of my earliest recollections. My parents left me a few weeks after I was born, so my grandmother ended up being my mother, essentially, for the first 3 to 4 years of my life. And even today with the Communist Party, they have something called 剩女. It's called leftover women policy. And women above the age of 27, which I am, are considered leftover women, and the Communist Party is doing everything it can to promote marriage and to get these professional women to find husbands. And due to the one-child policy, there's a tremendous gender imbalance. Women aren't allowed to speak out. So much no one's allowed to speak out. So the situation just continues unabated. Children are taught from an early age to follow the doctrines of the Communist Party. They learn this in school. Colleges are now changing the wording of their charter to reflect communist propaganda. And Fudan University was heretofore considered to be one of the best in the world, but it's succumbed to government pressure. Tiananmen Square essentially doesn't exist in Chinese history. There's no Google in China to begin with. There's something called Baidu, Weibo. You're not going to find anything about 1989. It's just completely scrubbed clean. The only pieces of history that one will ever find in China are completely sanitized. Hashtags that are critical of the government are quickly blocked. For example, messages of support about the doctor who died who sounded the alarm about coronavirus, they were quickly taken down. Professors who spoke out in favor of the Fudan University student protesters were immediately silenced. Any indications of support for Hong Kong are absolutely not accepted. And so people who are suffering as a result of poverty or the coronavirus or any sort of political persecution, they're not even given a chance to air their grievances. I just feel like, the doctor who alerted the world to the possibility of the coronavirus died. He was censored by authorities. Instead of being grateful that he sounded an alarm, the government sought to quash him and he ended up dying. That's just so emblematic of what's going on in China these days. You cannot escape Big Brother over there. It's just everywhere. And there's something in China called hukou, meaning that in order to move from one place to another, you need government permission. You can't just move willy-nilly. You need the approval of the local authorities. So even to move internally is not a matter of freedom. And China has recently implemented a surveillance system. The United States government uses it to go after terrorists and drug lords. But the Chinese government is using surveillance to go after everyone, to make sure that they know who the opponents of the Communist Party are. My grandmother, who was a mother to me, she brought me up when my parents were gone. She lives on a government compound. There are soldiers around that compound, and everyone has to follow strict regulations. There are guards positioned everywhere, and I feel like I'm living in something out of like 1984. And when I go back, it's terrifying. It really is. Because economic growth is slowing down, how long are the Chinese people just going to go along with it? And I know a lot of Chinese Americans feel similarly to me, but they're too afraid to say it. America, for me, and I think it takes an immigrant to truly understand how powerful this country is despite our problems. I would not have been able to get such an amazing education. I can't even imagine it. One reason why I was able to summon so much support for my congressional campaign here was that it was so novel and exhilarating for people to see a Chinese American woman. I'm speaking in regard to Chinese American immigrants. It was such a refreshing experience for them to see a woman speaking out on issues because they just have never seen that before. But I am thoroughly American, and for me, it's just a natural thing to do. The fact that some people are seriously considering electing a democratic socialist makes my hair stand up. It terrifies me. The idea that a cult of personality is okay in America, I find that mortifying. Cults of personality, where have we seen that before? Nazi Germany, communist China. It never ends well. And the tactics that supporters of a certain candidate have used are just unacceptable. To make people feel subhuman, how is that helpful to democracy at all? And these are the tactics employed by communist China. Silence, and silence and suppression. And anyone who even offers a different point of view is immediately the enemy. There's no gray area at all. You're either with us or you're against us, and if you're against us, we destroy you. And that is the mantra of the Communist Party, and I feel like I'm seeing the beginnings of that in America today, which is why I'm fighting so forcefully to make sure that Americans are aware that socialism is not for this country, and I refuse to condone that. Also, likewise, just because someone doesn't win an election doesn't mean that you need to tear down the whole entire structure. I feel like for some people it's all or nothing. It's not even just the Bernie bros on the internet. They're appearing in real life. I'm gathering signatures because I was chosen to be a delegate for the DNC, and as soon as they hear that I'm not for Bernie Sanders, the animosity is palpable. It's just like all of a sudden we're not even on the same team. It's just terrifying. It's just, I think, don't they realize that they need my vote after the primary if Bernie wins? It's just not conducive to any sort of discussion. It's basically either him or nothing. And there's so much secrecy around him. Where are his medical records? This is a 78-year-old man who had a heart attack recently, who's still eating steak, as he says, or like pork chops, and not following doctor's orders, and he hasn't fulfilled his promise releasing medical records. This is the same sort of secrecy that surrounds a communist regime. We don't have any sort of transparency into what's going on at the highest levels of the Chinese government. Likewise, we don't really know what's behind the curtain of the Sanders campaign. Like, what happened to Jane Sanders and the college in Vermont that's being investigated by the FBI? Why do we never talk about that? I just feel like there's so much propaganda surrounding both operations. Please wake up. You're falling for a scam. Bernie Sanders doesn't know how he's going to pay for Medicare for all. He was on CBS just a few weeks ago with Norah O'Donnell. She asked him, how much is it going to cost? He's like, I don't know. You don't know. We don't know how much healthcare is going to cost. It's just a castle in the sky. He doesn't know how to pay for his plans. He has no idea. It's this ideology that you're falling for. And I know that people are suffering and they're hurting, but you can't buy into plans that have no possibility of fruition. But I will shout from the rooftops that America, despite her problems, still remains the strongest and best country in the world. And perhaps because I'm an immigrant and I'm obviously not Caucasian, perhaps because I'm saying it, people might actually believe it. I just have such a profound sense of gratitude because I can see so clearly what my life would have been. I would have been a cog in the communist machine.